Okay, but we start. Dear colleagues, dear friends, I would say, welcome to the presentation of the fourth Rapid Damage and Needs Assessment, and happy to have more than 250 registrations for our today's event. This is why we're still waiting a little bit, and I'm quite sure we will still grow in number of participants. My name is Peter Bonin. I work for the Secretariat that supports the German platform for the reconstruction of Ukraine. And today's event is organized by the German platform for the reconstruction of Ukraine. The platform is an initiative of the German federal government that brings together stakeholders based in Germany who are interested and active in the reconstruction of Ukraine. The main objective of our work is to make Germany's contribution, reconstruction more effective and more sustainable through more exchange, through more information and stronger networks. Many of you, of our participants, members, have asked us to regularly offer events on current studies and analysis, and we're therefore very pleased to have with us today, again, we have to say, two experts from the World Bank to present the results of the fourth Rapid Damage and Needs Assessment, which has been released, not mistaken, somewhere on 25th of February 2025, very recently. We start with a classical technical housekeeping as well, before handing over to our guests. The event will be recorded. As we all know, the famous sentences, if you, by staying in the call, you agree to the recording, and you agree also that the recording will be shared on our website afterwards. Our central element today, as I said today, what we're doing here is about learning, exchanging, getting information. It's also about dialogue. We want to have a dialogue here as well and discussion. So we have enough time planned for questions and comments from all participants, but we would like to, in order to get it structured a bit better, I would like to ask you to post your question in the chat of the event, and we will afterwards see how we can structure it a little bit better. This will be my task to try, and I hope you trust in me that I will manage to structure the discussion a little bit by this, because we know we are a very diverse group of participants, and we expect also maybe questions from different angles. Let's see. Now coming to our subject. These are turbulent days, we all know, and these days are full of uncertainties, full of irritations about the question in what directions things are about to develop. And in all this, however, one thing is certain, I would say. It's important to have proper knowledge and data about the damage the war has caused, and as well as the needs for reconstruction that arise. And this is the task of the Rapid Damage and Needs Assessment, which has been conducted now for the fourth time. It's a joint endeavor of the World Bank, the European Commission, the United Nations, and the government of Ukraine. And we're very happy and delighted to have with us today Susanna Stanton-Geddes and Urszka Srinsky. Susanna and Urszka have contributed to the RDNA 4. They've gone all the way through this big work from the side of the World Bank as participants. And in today's presentation, Susanna will focus on the general findings, and Urszka will look at the 2025 priorities. They will hand over from one to each other, to the other during their input, I would propose. Still, 2-3 sentences about the two of you. Susanna is a senior disaster risk management specialist at the World Bank in Brussels, with a long-standing professional experiences in the field of urban resilience, critical infrastructure, post-disaster recovery. And Susanna has worked in several countries in Europe and in East Asia. And she's led and contributed to several World Bank reports, including economics for disaster prevention and preparedness, Ukraine Rapid Damage and Needs Assessment, as I mentioned, and building urban resilience principles, tools, and practice, and others. So a vast know-how in the background here. Urszka Slinsky is a senior public sector specialist at the World Bank within the Europe and Central Asia Institution's Global Department. And in her current role, she leads the public investment and public finance management initiatives in Ukraine. Very happy to have you with us, the two of you, and I hand over. I guess Susanna is taking the first round. Please, Susanna.
Great. Thank you very much for the warm introduction, and thank you for inviting Urszka and myself to present to your audience. Let me just put the slides up. Hopefully they work. And we can start. Good. Can I just assure myself that you can see the slides?
We can, but now we can see the full one. Right,
oh, great. Thank you very much. So, as it was already introduced, this is the fourth Rapid Damage Needs Assessment. It started in November 2024 and was published just a few weeks ago on 25th of February. The objective is indeed to estimate the damage, the losses, recovery and reconstruction needs from almost the 3 years since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And also the assessment includes recovery and reconstruction priorities for 2025, which Urszka will detail in a few minutes. And the assessment follows, like the previous ones, the damage and loss methodology that was endorsed by the UN, the European Commission, and World Bank, and used in several disaster and conflict settings. So 3 years since the invasion, the human, the social, economic toll has been immense. It remains immense. Here are just some key figures. As of December 2024, there were some 4.6 million people registered as internally displaced, some 6.2 million people externally displaced. Over 12,000 civilians have lost their lives. Poverty has increased. We have data for that. And we know that vulnerable groups have been hardest hit. In the face of that, we have also seen witnessed huge resilience of the Ukraine's people to withstand what is happening. I wanted to add this slide, as it was mentioned earlier. This is the fourth damage needs assessment. It builds naturally on the previous assessments, which respectively covered the first 3 months, the first year, 22 months, and now, as we can see, this all-encompassing RDNA 4, which covers basically the period from the start of the invasion until December 31st, 2024. And we are here with Urszka from the World Bank, but as Peter also said, this is a joint assessment led by the government of Ukraine, European Commission, and United Nations, as well as the World Bank. Now let's go into the results. Here are the headline figures. As of end of December, the direct damage has reached $176 billion US. This is across all sectors that were covered in the assessment, and direct damage refers to damage to infrastructure, equipment, so it's really a kind of physical damage. The reconstruction and recovery needs are, of course, much higher because they consider also building back better approach, meaning not building what was there before, but building to modern and green standards, etc. These needs, the 524 billion, includes both public but also private financing. And it does not include the needs that have already been met through various efforts. Now let's look a little bit deeper into the damage in terms of the sectors most affected as well as regions. In terms of the sectors that recorded highest damage, these are housing, transport, energy, as well as commerce and industry. To give you an example, in the housing sector, we know that we calculated about 57.6 billion of damage has been sustained. This is about 33% of the total damage. And just to give you an example, about 13% of the total housing stock has been damaged and destroyed, affecting more than 2.5 million households. So this is really the most impacted sector. Transport has also been heavily damaged with about 20% of the total damage. Energy sector, about 12% of the total damage. Commerce and industry is about 10% of the total damage. And you can see also the map on the right side in terms of spatial distribution. Damage remains concentrated in several oblasts, including Donetska, Kharkivska, Luhanska, Zaporizhska, Khersonska, as well as Kievska Oblast. And the damage in these regions sums up to about 127 billion, or over 70% of total damage. When considering the changes in the past 12 months, meaning between the RDNA 3 and RDNA 4, you can see that on average across the different sectors, the direct damage increased by about 24 billion. Housing and transport continue to dominate the damages. In the energy sector, there was a substantial increase from RDNA 3 to RDNA 4. Some of it relates to reclassification of district heating, but a large part also reflects the type of attacks that were sustained on this sector. Education sector also recorded a high increase linked to also improved data. And similarly, in justice and public administration, damages increased also due to a wider assessment scope, so more data was available. I should also mention that in some sectors, the damage estimates in RDNA 4 were also impacted by the exchange rate adjustment, reflecting the depreciation of hryvnia of about 15%. And as I mentioned in the few examples, there has been some reclassifications, in some cases new data sources, or in some cases actually less data. So there is also some fluctuation on that. Now, if we look into the recovery and reconstruction needs, these really remain substantial. They are estimated at 524 billion for a period of 10 years. As I mentioned, these include both public and private sectors. In terms of the impacted sectors, the sectors with the highest needs, this correlates, of course, with the damages sustained. Housing has the highest needs, about 16%. Transport is about 15%. Energy, 13%. Commerce and industry, 12% of the total needs. And as I mentioned at the beginning, this figure excludes actually needs that were already met through the state budget or through international support. In this assessment, we were able to consider data across 8 sectors that estimated that the needs met are about 13 billion already, and this figure includes both public and private sector contribution. Private sector firms have actually accounted for most of the needs met in the commerce and industry, in the financial and banking, and the telecom and digital sectors. So the needs reflect the data available as of December 2024, which is really the cutoff for this report. And there are some, of course, limitations, and it continues to be important to actually track data also on the needs met. Now, again, here a short comparison in terms of the last 12 months, so between RDNA 3, which is the top bar, and then RDNA 4. Overall, the needs have increased by 37 billion, so almost 8%. Some of the dimensions I mentioned earlier, data collection, updated cost estimates with the hryvnia, have impacted cost estimates. In the demining and explosive hazard management sector, the needs have decreased from about 35 billion in RDNA 3 to 30 billion in RDNA 4, and this reflects improved data, but also progress made in survey and clearance operations, and this is consistent also with previous RDNAs. Here is a figure on the left, the damage, on the right side, the needs, and you can see each of the columns represents the RDNAs, and they are grouped by kind of sectors, meaning social sector, infrastructure, productive, and cross-cutting. So this is in a nutshell on the damage and needs. I'll pass now to Urska on the priorities.
Great. Thank you very much, Zuzana. Good morning, colleagues. Regards from Washington, D.C. As Zuzana mentioned, so she presented the damages and then kind of needs assessment for the next 10 years. And in my section, I will focus on what has been identified in terms of 2025 recovery and reconstruction priorities for Ukraine. So in this section, I'll outline the approach that was used for the prioritization, as well as the overall financing needs, as well as the financing gap. I should note that, typically when we do rapid damage and needs assessments, we don't necessarily kind of include the estimates of recovery and reconstruction priorities for the following year only. But in the case of Ukraine, this is what we've done for the third time in a row. And there's a kind of growing recognition among development partners, Ukraine, that it's really important for the government of Ukraine and its development partners to have a full understanding of the priorities for recovery and reconstruction for the following year, and then also agree on the funding mechanisms. So we already know that findings from the rapid damage and needs assessment will directly shape discussions on financing at the Ukraine Recovery Conference in Rome in July this year. So for the third time in a row, as I said, we've conducted this assessment of recovery and reconstruction priorities for the following year, so this year 2025. But what's different this year, that particularly for the investment part of priorities, the approach was we were able to fully align with the government's newly developed but still evolving public investment management system, so PIM system. So as many of you might know, in 2024, the government of Ukraine piloted its new system for the way it identifies public investment projects, the way it prioritizes them, and the way it selects them for budgeting. Introducing new PIM system is a very complex reform. So it's been really great to see the progress that the government of Ukraine has made, particularly in such difficult times. And the pilot process, so in 2024, already resulted in a central government, so central government only, single project pipeline, which consists 787 projects that were identified as eligible for external financing and inclusion in the state budget. But I think what's been most commendable to see is the kind of whole of the government approach to the way investments were identified. So key spending units, ministries and agencies submitted project proposals, infrastructure project proposals, and then those were assessed by the three key PIM ministries: Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Economy, and Ministry of Development, each of them then assessing these project proposals for consideration in line with kind of its own area of expertise. So Ministry of Finance evaluated fiscal sustainability, Ministry of Economy assessed economic recovery potential, alignment with sectoral strategies, and Ministry of Development examined integration with local and regional priorities. And then the government of Ukraine also established a new PIM institution, Strategic Investment Council, chaired by the Prime Minister, that approved this final list of projects that were included in the single project pipeline, which, as I said, included 787 projects. we do believe that this marks a really important shift in kind of whole of government approach to investment planning. Previously, according to our analysis, there used to be 12 different pathways on, different options of how projects would be included in the budget. So we now see a much more streamlined approach to the way investment projects are streamlined. But it's still in early stages, this BEAM system. So although it's now being piloted at the central level, there's much more work to be done to operationalize it. And then, of course, expanding its application at the subnational levels. There's a lot of work currently happening in refining what we call BEAM methodologies. So for appraisal, selection, prioritization, there's a very strong donor coordination on designing these methodologies, trying to also think how to include private sector participation in public investment management. And then, as I said, rolling out the new BEAM system at the subnational level. That still has to happen. So this year, there was a very strong focus on the central level. So on the next slide, this was very much about the process on how the prioritization was done. But now we can kind of review the findings of the outcome of the prioritization process. So focusing on overall financing needs for 2025, secured funding, and then the remaining financing gap. So as you can see here, the total 2025 recovery and reconstruction financing needs are estimated at $17.32 billion US. And this covers both public investment projects. They are estimated at $11.88 US billion. And this followed the procedure of identification of prioritization that I just described. But in addition, the government also identified priorities for recovery and reconstruction for 2025 in a form of what we call non-investment programs. So these are programs such as social transfers, housing compensation, demining, that do not meet the definition of infrastructure projects, their recurrent expenditure, but still qualify for recovery and reconstruction priorities. And those amounted to $5.44 billion US. So this leaves a total financing gap of $9.95 US billion. So as I said, public investment projects prioritized using the new BEAM system. So overall financing need estimated at $11.88 US billions, $5.46 billion already secured, and I'll explain in the next slide how that funding has been secured, which leaves a financing gap of $6.43 billion. And all the investment project priorities come from the single project pipeline that I mentioned in the previous slide. And then for non-investment programs, so those were, as I said, estimated a total need at $5.44 billion US, $1.91 billion already secured, which leaves us with a gap of $3.53 billion US. So in the next slide, I want to just give you a little bit more details on both investment projects that are identified as 2025 recovery and reconstruction priorities, and then non-investment programs. As I said, for public investment projects, they were identified using the newly created public investment management system. So single project pipeline was created, consolidating all central government investment projects. And single project pipeline included for this year 787 multi-year projects. And the total estimate for those 787 projects is $61.7 billion US. And out of 787 projects in the single project pipeline, as I said, these are multi-year projects, the government of Ukraine identified 304 projects as priorities for recovery and reconstruction for 2025. And they are estimated at $11.88 billion US. Out of those 304 projects identified as priorities for 2025, 92 projects secured funding in the amount of $5.25 billion US through the state budget, state guarantees, and international financial institutions. In addition, 16 projects secured $0.21 billion, but this came from the recurrent budget or from international technical assistance grants. So these projects were identified as, they're basically operating costs. So they're still projects, but these are recurrent expenditure, so not included in the public investment program. So 196 priority projects out of 304 identified as priorities for 2025 now remain unfunded, with a total of 6.43 billion gap in US dollars. And then, as I said, the government also identified priorities in a form of budget programs, such as housing compensation, demining, social transfers, support to businesses. But this followed a separate process. So because they didn't qualify these programs as infrastructure projects, the government used a separate process to identify them. We'd also established criteria, Ministry of Development, leading that process with strong inputs from key spending units. And these programs were later approved by the Cabinet of Ministers. So the government identified 44 priority non-investment programs for 2025, and 19 of those already secured funding in the amount of $1.91 billion through the budget, through support from development partners, as I mentioned. And 25 programs remain unfunded, which leaves the government with a 3.53 billion financing gap. Hopefully this gives you kind of a better overview of the approach the government used to identify priorities for recovery and reconstruction for 2025. I know there's currently a lot of discussion on these priorities among development partners, but also kind of giving you the estimates we were able to establish in terms of overall financing needs, but also the financing gap. So I think with this, Zuzana, we covered our presentation. I know we have one last slide with the QR code where participants can use to download the report. I know it's being currently translated into Ukrainian. We're also working on a design version. And with this, I want to hand over to you, Zuzana, in case there's any additional information on the next steps related to RDNA4. Thank you.
Thank you, Urska. You said it all, so the QR code is available, and we can put the link also into chat. Obviously, this was just a short presentation, and there is a lot more information in the report, but we also are happy to answer any questions as they come. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much to both of you, Urska and Zuzana. We have first questions in the chat, and since they are not overwhelming in terms of number, but of course not in terms of content, we have enough time to pass the word also to those participants who have posted them. And to make things easy, so far it is quite overseeable. I pass the word. Now we're just getting some more information. Nonetheless, I would ask Jakob Fischer to come in. There's more. There are some questions starting with information. Jakob Fischer, would you like to bring in your question in person? And maybe then right afterwards also Stanislav Taran. Maybe we can collect those two questions and then come back to you.
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me?
And maybe, excuse me, Jakob, sorry, I forgot to ask. Of course, since we are in a dialogue mode here, you quickly say, name your organizational background, what you are, where you're coming from.
Yeah, so I'm a scientific researcher at a university in Germany, Cottbus. And we are dealing with building recycling and also reusing of concrete elements for new constructions. And I was wondering the amount of the $84 billion for housing sector, how are they distributed? Is it for new construction, for reconstruction, or single housing, more multi-single housing? So that is my question, yeah.
And I invite Stanislav to add his question so we can collect a little bit.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Stanislav. I am a project officer in the Council of European Municipalities and Region, and I am working on the project called Bridges of Trust. Over the last few years, we had provided an exchange between Ukrainian and European municipalities, and as a result of this exchanges and cooperation, around 48 project proposal was created. And therefore, my question is more about the methodology. How was project selected in terms of the geographical coverage in Ukraine? How far is the front line and so on? So what was considered, it might be helpful for my work to understand how it was developed. Thank you.
Peter, you want us to start answering questions? Yeah?
Yes, please. You decide by yourself who would be the right person to pick up which one.
Good. So first of all, indeed, I don't know why the link didn't work, but I shared a separate one, so you can access it there. Then the first question, Jakob, on the amount. So I would recommend you look in the report. Here I'm just going to share my screen. Actually, briefly, I put out the report that you can access online. This is the housing chapter. Maybe you're able to see it. All chapters are relatively short. So the housing chapter, and at the end, you will see also tables. It follows the same structure, the damage and loss part, so the impact, and the recovery and reconstruction needs. It includes details, what is exactly costed, and some elements of approach. But from the table, you can already see that indeed, usually the categories that are considered for calculations is reconstruction needs. So these relate directly to the physical damage that is sustained across the whole portfolio. So be it single, be it multifamily, etc. It includes repair, reconstruction, technical inspections, designs, etc. And then there are also the second main category, and this is usually consistent across all sectors, is the service delivery and restoration. So these are then, say, support for the temporary housing, but also debris removal. So the details are, some of the details are captured in the chapter, in the report.
Just seems like we lost Susanna. Maybe, Urshka, if you want to back up.
Sure.
Either this question or to yours, and we see whether Susanna will come back.
So hopefully Susanna can reconnect and provide more information on the housing part, but I'm happy to take over all the questions that have been addressed to the BEAM part. Starting with questions if we could share links to the single project pipeline. And I shared 2 links here. The first one is to the Ukraine's DREAM system. So the IT system, so digital BEAM ecosystem that the government is using for preparing and assessing investment projects. So you can basically see the details of all the project concepts that were entered into the DREAM systems and then approved as part of the single project pipeline. And then I also shared a link to the government of Ukraine when the Cabinet of Ministers Strategic Investment Council approved this list of 787 projects. And I know there was also a question if we could provide more information on the examples of projects in water supply, sanitation. So basically you can actually use the DREAM system to do the kind of drill down analysis. So in December, the Strategic Investment Council approved 9 new sectoral priorities. They call them priority areas or sferas in Ukraine. So all the projects have to basically fit one of these priority areas. And there's also one on water supply, sanitation, irrigation, and solid waste management. So anyone who goes to this list should be able to drill down and see some of those projects. if you have any issues accessing or would like more details on the analysis we provided, I will also leave my email address here if that's okay, and totally fine with me if people reach out and need more information for each of the sectoral priorities areas. So happy to provide those. There's quite a big financing need actually in the water management sector. So probably useful to have follow-up discussions with development partners working in this sector and the government of Ukraine. I also wanted to go back to the question Jakob raised. I know it is mostly related to kind of rebuilding residential buildings, but in relation to the public investment management system, I should point out that the government of Ukraine, so Ministry of Economy, they recently established a new office, which is called the Green Transition Office, that is looking into how to integrate climate change environmental criteria in all the PIM methodologies for selection, prioritization, appraisal, and so forth. So what they're currently considering is using EU taxonomy, so 6 environmental criteria to integrate in all the methodologies. So that would include for upstream, so for preparing projects, as well as implementing them. And I also noticed there was a question earlier on how many of these projects will be monitored. So this is one of the aspects that hasn't really been thought through yet, as of yet. There's been a draft methodological guidance prepared and legal act drafted on how projects will be monitored and how they will be evaluated. So looking at the implementation side, but there's still a lot of discussions on exactly who are the stakeholders that should be involved in the process. What are some of the templates, guidance documents that need to be developed? And there's currently a lot of discussion in development partners involved in this process on really how to strengthen that aspect of the public investment management cycle. And then Stanislav, on your question on subnational governments, right, included in terms of projects in the single project pipeline, as I alluded to in my presentation, I think, and that's also one of the challenges of the PIM system in Ukraine as it's currently, is that the PIM system was piloted this year at the central government level. So many hromadas and lower levels of subnational governments didn't actually submit projects for the inclusion in the central government single project pipeline. And those projects from hromadas and other levels of the government that were included in the single project pipeline, in accordance with the terminology we use at the World Bank, they would still be some kind of link to central government operations. So I don't think they would be considered as typical subnational government projects. So there's still an enormous task to be done in Ukraine in rolling out this new PIM system and identifying project priorities at the local levels. So yes, there were a lot of projects from hromadas, and we have the numbers in the report that I can provide, and also type of projects if you need. But we didn't see many projects from the subnational governments because the system hasn't been properly rolled out at the subnational level. But according to the EU-Ukraine facility plan and the cooperation that the government of Ukraine has with the IMF, one of the structural benchmark is that the system is fully rolled out starting end of this calendar year, 2025, and then implemented in 2026. So a lot of work still to be done at the subnational level. Hopefully, Stanislav, that responds to your question on the rollout. I see we have Lizana back, but I'm also trying to see any other questions that are addressed for the PIM part.
Yes, apologies. I had some technical issues, so I'm not sure when you lost me actually, and I cannot seem to get my camera back to work.
Thank you to have you with us back again. Ushka came in answering mainly the questions towards PIM and the forward-looking kind of issues. I have to admit, I don't quite see from the list. Ushka, you should help me with this. Are there other points, issues that would be left to Susanna in the
Yes. So Susanna, you started responding to the question on Jakob in terms of rebuilding residential buildings, including European standards on energy efficiency. I tried to explain how that is planned as part of the BEAM process, but I think there's probably more information you could provide on that. And then there was a question here. Let me just here. Yes, so do you happen to know if investments for the Ukraine Parliament are included in these government estimates? I think some of that was done as part of the governance chapter on public administration as a cross-cutting team, but you would probably have more information on that. So governance chapter and then, let me see. And the housing sector, yeah.
Okay, so for the housing sector, I'm sorry if I repeat myself, I would propose to look in the report. I will reshare again the link, which hopefully works. And if you have more detailed questions, we can put you in touch with the colleague that led the development of the chapter. But in general, it's both repairs, reconstruction, and then service delivery type of activities. On the standards, in principle, indeed, the higher standards are considered in line with basically reforms that Ukraine is doing also to ensure integration into the market and eventually into the EU. But it depends also sector on sector, and the costing is reflected that way. And then the question on the parliament, I don't remember exactly this type of asset, but if, then it would be indeed included in the governance public administration. It is important to mention that, this assessment, the damage, loss and needs part, does not go asset by asset. It rather looks at portfolio of assets. So there are certain asset categories. So we would have to see whether the parliament itself was included in one of the asset categories.
Okay.
And Peter, there's also a question, I think quite important here from Howard Schatz on, to what extent do current priority projects and future investments for recovery and reconstruction kind of consider resilience for future Russian attacks? And how are they included in costs and planning? There's a lot of discussions we had as part of developing new PIM systems to, trying to differentiate between what we consider emergency investment projects. So what's considered that, you need to rebuild quickly, and what are some of those projects that still have to go through a regular public investment management system. So have to have appraisals. How do you do them? And how do you, make them more resilient? These are very difficult discussions, and there's been a lot of, intense discussions on what do you rebuild now and what do you wait to be rebuilt after the invasion ends. And I know particularly the way the World Bank has supported reforms in the education sector. It's mostly been in building shelters kind of underground to still allow kids to attend school. But, how do you rebuild schools when they're very likely, or there's a big option of being, attacked again? So I don't, It's an ongoing discussion on what do you rebuild where, in which areas, and I know that the government has some criteria on how to decide that. But I think there's a lot of understanding, that security concerns have to be incorporated, but that it's often a difficult call to make.
Thank you for this.
Yeah, indeed. I'm just echoing what Urška said. For example, the costing of the needs in the education sector, that chapter that includes bomb shelters for schools, because this is also in line with basically the approach taken by the government. So those, for example, costs are included.
Thank you for this. And I oversee it properly, we have been talking about housing. Not sure, Stefan Kegelbein's question on relatedness to European standards, energy efficiency has been covered yet, or maybe also because we have a little time left, maybe Stefan, you would like to come in and explain a bit more, give some background on the question. And then...
Yeah, my feeling is that Urška already touched upon it. Stefan Kegelbein, German Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and we are in steady contact with our branch, let's say, in Ukraine, with the Foreign Trade Chamber abroad in Kiev, and they have a lot of companies, members, which are in the sector active, windows, energy efficiency and everything else. And our fear, or their fear, is a bit that if you just go along the price, you buy the one glass window, just make it very concrete. You take the one glass window, and in 5 years, people are paid off for eating the flat. And to avoid this, in terms of everything, the question is to which extent this is reflected in the tenders, so that you really think about efficiency, insulation, the windows, the doors, and everything else. But I guess we touched already the topic a bit.
Thank you, though, to give a little bit of the background on this as well. This is what we thought about dialogue, of course. And with regards to the time, I would propose that we've come quite far here. Maybe an overall little last feedback from your side, Urška and Susanna, about the questions. Have these been according to your expectations? Have you expected maybe questions also in a different direction? Maybe you can give us your last impression about the round.
No, I would say thank you very much for those questions. These are good. As mentioned, we couldn't cover everything in the presentation because there's just so many sectors, so much data to explain, but we also remain available. I think there was a question whether the presentation will be shared. From our side, it is absolutely fine to share the PDF and also our contacts if there are any follow-up questions. And as I said, on housing specifically, for example, the kind of a more detailed breakdown of what was included in the total needs on the energy efficiency. Here I would just, Stefan, also add that it depends on the call, which, on the call that the government runs. There might be a difference if it's just the rapid repairs for heating, for example, right, for the next season, or if it is really the full recovery and reconstruction of say, a building. Because the former, if it's just some extremely rapid, that might not, of course, fulfill all the standards needed, and it would be not actually, on our side, it's not recorded as a needs met, because the need for resilient, for the proper reconstruction is not met. It would be still in the realm of repairs. But then for the permanent recovery and reconstruction, yes, in principle, all the standards should be met. Of course, that has a cost implication. So it is always, a balancing act also for the government, for the partners to do. So it's quite complex, as you know very well. Yeah, I don't know, Urška, if you like to...
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to present the findings. I think particularly for the part I tend to cover, the 2025 priorities, I think it's always a good opportunity to show a lot of success that the government of Ukraine has made in putting forward these very challenging reforms. I think the questions that were posed are similar to what we usually get. There's more interest in learning about specific projects. So happy to share these links and, the digital dream beam IT system that the government has. Very transparent, provides a lot of information, so allows opportunity, for those who are interested to learn more. But I do want to go back to Stefan's question because I think it's such an important one on building back better, thinking about energy efficiency, just to kind of reassure that there's a lot of discussion currently, mostly led by the European Commission and the support they're providing to Ukraine on ensuring that those standards are included in how public projects are conceptualized, but then also how they get implemented through procurement and other aspects. The World Bank, we have been also heavily involved in this process, so trying to consider environmental but as well as social inclusivity standards in the way, throughout the public investment management cycle. So there's still a lot of ongoing work on this, and hopefully by the end of this calendar year, there will be more clarity on how these standards will be incorporated throughout the PIM cycle. So still a lot of work to be done by the Ukrainian government. I should say what we've seen globally, it usually takes around 5 to 10 years for a lot of these reforms to fully come into action. So again, a lot of progress have been done and very commendable that the government is pursuing them during such difficult times. And thank you again.